Melanie and Samantha lived in a small town and met in high school. The girls became friends right away, even though they were very different. Samantha started making up and wearing short skirts very early. This really annoyed the teachers, but the boys were going crazy. Samantha was always the star of all the school parties. But Melanie felt uncomfortable at them. But that didn't stop the girls' friendship. After high school, they moved to the state capital, where they rented an apartment together and enrolled in the same college. After graduation, their independent adult life began. Samantha devoted her time to entertainment, and she spent all her money on beautiful clothes and cosmetics. Sometimes there wasn't even enough left for food, but she always had a new dress hanging in her closet. But Melanie, in addition to her main job, was a volunteer and took care of homeless animals in a shelter. That's where she met Stephen. She liked him immediately, but she never would have guessed that he was rich. Of course, it was hard to imagine that a single rich man could spend his free time taking care of dirty dogs and cats. One day, Stephen gave Melanie a ride home, and she invited him in for coffee as a sign of gratitude. There, Stephen saw Samantha. The young man reacted to her just like all the other guys before. He really liked her, and it was no surprise. Samantha looked gorgeous. The fancy dress, the stunning styling, the manicure and makeup. They began dating and soon announced their engagement. Melanie watched her friend's happiness from the sidelines and was a little jealous. But she understood she had no chance to compete with Samantha. That was why she decided not to get upset from now on, but just to be happy for her friend and wish her happiness. Samantha moved in with Stephen and began wedding preparations. One day she invited Melanie to her house for a visit. Samantha already felt like a lady of the house and showed Melanie a gorgeous house with a swimming pool. Then the bride bragged about her amazing wedding dress. She kept talking about how they were going to buy a house on the seashore and that all her dreams would finally come true. Melanie was happy for Samantha, but she herself dreamed not of the sea and a fancy house, but of a loved one nearby in a strong family. The next day, Samantha went to the beauty salon and shopped as usual. When she returned in the evening, she walked past Stephen's office and suddenly heard Stephen talking sharply to someone on speakerphone. Samantha realized that Stephen was reprimanding his commercial director for some misstep. She also heard something about the collapsed stock market and bankruptcy. Then Stephen, in anger, threw the phone at the wall so that it broke into pieces across the room. Samantha came in frightened and tried to find out what was going on. Stephen clearly did not expect seeing her and immediately began to calm her down, saying that he would take care of everything. But he couldn't fix anything. Stephen lost all his money and had to close the business. The house was mortgaged to the bank. Hard days came. Samantha was in shock at what had happened. They had to postpone the wedding, and Samantha threw hysterics at Stephen every day. He assured his beloved that in a couple of years he would definitely restore his business, but he needed to think everything through carefully so as not to repeat his previous mistakes. But Samantha was terrified. All her plans for a beautiful life were ruined. When Stephen offered to arrange a small wedding, inviting only the closest friends and relatives, it seemed ridiculous to Samantha. She did not want to live impoverished. She let Stephen know that she was ready to wait, but just a little, and he should hurry up with solving his problems. Soon Samantha had to go back to work as the secretary of an executive in one company. And while her husband-to-be was trying to find a way out of his rough patch, Samantha began dating with her boss. He was twice her age, but she was not embarrassed by this, and half a year later she left Stephen for him. When Melanie found out about this, she couldn't hold her indignation. But Samantha's arguments were simple. For the past year, Stephen couldn't make any money. But her boss was rich, and he loved her. Besides, Samantha advised Melanie to think about settling her life too, and not to spend her days with all those smelly dogs in the shelter. Melanie felt sorry for Samantha, because she knew that such a mind would hardly bring her friend happiness eventually. The girls said goodbye coldly, and almost stopped communicating. 6 months later, she married her boss. Now she was living in a penthouse, driving an expensive car with a chauffeur, and frequently travelling abroad. Several years went by like that. And then Samantha found out that her husband had a new girlfriend. She tried to cause a scandal, but her husband told her he didn't love her anymore and wasn't going to live with her. After recovering from the shock, Samantha immediately asked about sharing their property, but the husband was well experienced in such matters, and Samantha was not his first wife. He laughed out loud and said that Samantha had signed a prenuptial agreement, that she was not entitled to anything. Taking pity on her, he gave her some money for the first time, though. He also took back her expensive clothes and jewelry that he had already given her. Samantha had no idea what to do next. She did not even have close friends who could support her in such a difficult moment. And then the woman remembered about Melanie. Of course, Samantha was ashamed that she had never called her for these years, but knowing Melanie's kind heart, Samantha had no doubt that she would help to support her. Melanie was very surprised by the call. Samantha immediately apologized for never calling and told her sad story about her failed marriage, and then she started asking to visit. Melanie listened to her childhood friend and then simply stunned her with the news that it was impossible, and all because she and Stephen were at their oceanfront villa. Samantha listened and couldn't believe her ears. It turned out that Stephen and Melanie had gotten married a few months after she had left. Then the man still launched a new business and had been successfully developing it for 3 years. Melanie helped him at first. She was also a secretary and courier and manager, and recently they had twins, a boy and a girl, and Melanie now devoted herself to raising children. Samantha disconnected the phone and wept bitter tears. The woman cursed herself for destroying her wealthy future with her own hands. Meanwhile, Melanie thought that life had put everything in its place. She loved Stephen, and even if he didn't make a lot of money, she would still be with him. After all, the most important thing in family was love and respect.